Right before you die, your brain pulls off one final trick so wild that the scientists who recorded it thought their equipment was broken. And that's just the beginning. Your heart is going to beat about 3 billion times before it's finally done. But the second it stops, your body kicks off one of the craziest processes it will ever go through, and almost nobody knows it's even happened. Here's the first shock. Doctors don't even agree on one single moment that counts as death anymore. For most of history, the rule was simple. Heart stops, you're dead. But your heart stopping doesn't mean your brain shuts down instantly. There's a window, sometimes several minutes long, where your heart has gone quiet, but your brain cells are still very much alive, still firing, still doing something. That in-between zone is exactly why doctors had to invent a separate category called clinical death, versus the final, no turning back kind called biological death. That confusion isn't new, by the way. Back in the 1700s and 1800s, doctors were so bad at telling real death from deep comas that being buried alive was a genuine, widespread fear. It got so serious that people started patenting safety coffins, actual products with bells, flags, or breathing tubes connected to the surface, so that if you woke up 6 feet under, you could signal for help. Some designs even included a string tied to the corpse's hand, running up to a bell above ground. Nobody knows exactly how many people were saved by one, but the fear was real enough that these coffins stayed in production for over 100 years. So what's happening in that gap? In 2013, scientists studying dying rats picked up something nobody expected. In the seconds right after the heart stopped, brain activity didn't fade out quietly. It spiked, a huge synchronized burst of electrical activity, more organized than during normal waking life. Almost a decade later, doctors recording a dying human patient's brain by accident caught something eerily similar in the same specific brainwave pattern linked to memory and dreaming. Nobody fully knows why this happens yet, but one leading idea is genuinely wild. Your brain might be capable of one last, intensely vivid burst of activity right as it's shutting down, which might explain one of the strangest things people report after almost dying. The classic life flashing before your eyes. That 2022 recording came from an 87-year-old patient who was already being monitored for a seizure when his heart suddenly stopped completely by accident, giving scientists their first ever direct recording of a dying human brain. In the 30 seconds before and after his heart stopped, his brain waves showed the exact same patterns linked to memory recall and dreaming, the kind your brain uses when it's pulling up old memories on purpose. It's only one case, so scientists are careful not to overclaim, but it's the closest thing to hard evidence that a dying brain really might replay memories on its way out, which might also explain something millions of people have reported and doctors used to just dismiss. Near-death experiences, the tunnel, the bright light, a feeling of calm, or floating outside your own body. For decades, this got waved off as fantasy. Now scientists think there's real biology behind it. When your brain starts running low on oxygen, your visual system tends to fail from the outside edges inward, which can create the sensation of a shrinking tunnel with light at the center. Mix that with a flood of brain chemicals released under extreme stress, plus your brain's dream-generating machinery accidentally switching on at the worst possible moment, and you get an experience that feels unbelievably real, even though it's happening entirely inside a brain running on fumes. And here's a question almost everyone secretly wonders. Does dying actually hurt? The honest answer depends entirely on how it happens, but there's genuinely comforting evidence for sudden or traumatic death specifically. In moments of extreme danger, your brain floods your system with natural pain-killing chemicals called endorphins, along with adrenaline that can blunt pain signals almost instantly. Survivors of severe accidents have described feeling strangely calm or even numb in the moment itself, with the real pain only arriving later, once their body realizes it's safe. Nobody can promise dying never hurts, because it depends completely on the situation. But your own body is built with a built-in emergency painkiller system, ready to activate the second things go seriously wrong. Here's the part almost nobody knows. Hearing might be the very last sense to go. Studies on hospice patients close to death show their brains still responding to sound, still reacting to their own name, in some cases up until minutes before the end. Doctors now genuinely tell families it may be worth talking to a dying loved one because on some level, there's a real chance they can still hear you. But your brain shutting down is only the opening chapter of a much longer, much weirder process. Once blood stops flowing, individual cells across your body don't die all at once. They die on completely different timelines. Brain cells, starving for oxygen, can start breaking down within minutes, which is exactly why doctors are racing against the clock when it comes to organ donation. A kidney can survive outside the body for around a day, but a heart has to be transplanted within just a handful of hours to still work. Skin cells and hair follicles are far tougher. They can keep functioning for a short while, for hours after everything else has stopped, which is where the old myth about hair and nails still growing after death actually comes from. They don't really keep growing. The skin around them just dries out and shrinks, making nails and hair look longer than they are. And your body doesn't just sit there afterward. Within minutes, enzymes that were peacefully digesting your last meal start doing something new. They begin digesting you. It's your own body, quietly starting to break itself down from the inside, using the exact same chemical tools it used on lunch. A few hours later, muscles stiffen into rigor mortis as calcium floods into cells and locks muscle fibers in place, before eventually loosening again as decomposition continues. Here's where it gets almost beautiful, if you zoom out far enough. None of the atoms that made you disappear. Every carbon atom, every molecule of water in your body gets released back into soil, air, and water, recycled into plants, into the atmosphere, eventually into other living things. Scientists have actually calculated that a decent fraction of the carbon atoms in your body right now once belonged to dinosaurs, ancient trees, or long-extinct animals. Your atoms are older than the human species itself, and they were never really yours to begin with. You were just borrowing them for a few decades. So, does anything survive besides atoms? This is where honest science has to stop and admit something rare. Nobody actually knows. Consciousness. The actual experience of being you, thinking your thoughts from the inside, is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in all of science. Nobody can fully explain how a few pounds of electrical signals produces the feeling of being a person in the first place, let alone what happens to that feeling when the signals stop. Some scientists think consciousness simply ends completely when brain activity ends. Others aren't convinced we even understand consciousness well enough yet to say for sure. This isn't a question religion answers one way and science answers another. It's a genuine open frontier, and anyone who claims total certainty either way is guessing. What science can say for certain is this: death is a slow, staged process, stretched out over minutes, hours, even days, with your brain possibly lighting up one final time, your senses shutting down in a specific order, your cells dying on wildly different clocks, and your own body starting to recycle itself within hours. And every single atom that made you keeps going, folded back into the world, doing this same thing it's been doing for billions of years, long before you existed and long after. The scariest thing about death was never that it's the end. It's that almost nobody actually knows what it looks like from the inside, and maybe that mystery is exactly what makes being alive right now worth paying attention to.